Hello, so I'm going to talk to you about oneness. So the concept of oneness is a very important idea. It is the foundational idea of the New Age, also what maybe some would call the just spiritualism. So first off, let's talk about God. So is there a God? So we have two answers to that. We have either yes or no. And it also depends on how we define God. So usually we define God as our creator, the source of creation, the being, if you will, that created us, right? So either it exists or it doesn't. It's not saying that there's some in-between answer where it's true and not true, right? Well, anyways, okay, so let's define God. What is God? So God is a being, a source of creation that would create existence, okay? So you have to ask, yourself, can something be created from nothing? That's a good question, right? So is it possible for us to not be created from something? Okay. Next, you have to ask yourself, can something suddenly appear? So could the world, could the universe just suddenly be there? Okay, so we talk about the Big Bang. We talk about the Big Bang as the theory of creation, but what created the Big Bang? They talk about it being these dense, my understanding anyways, I'm not a scientist, dense cluster of all this energy that then it just exploded out, okay? But what created all this dense energy? What created all of that? What created this process? Right? So, to me, it just seems like something cannot be created from nothing. If you speak of God, okay, just suddenly creating, that doesn't make sense to me either. So let's think of this, okay? So we have God, and God then says, hey, I think I'm going to do something here and I'm going to create something outside myself. What would have led God to decide that? What would lead God to decide to create something outside himself or herself itself? God just exists. And then suddenly God decides to do something. Okay? Think about our existence. Why do we decide to do something? It's because of our relationship to other things, right? Or we're sitting down, we're contemplating ideas. So God could have contemplated, I guess, could have sat down and just started contemplating, but all it has to do is contemplate itself, right? There's nothing outside God. It would have to be contemplating itself. There's nothing else outside, right? Alright, so let's say God decides to create something. What does it have to create with besides itself? There's nothing outside itself, right? So if God creates, God decides to create, it has to be from itself, from its source energy, from whatever it is, right? So right there, that just declares that we are from God. We are God. Everything is, right? We're the same sort of source. We're the energy. So the idea of separation from God doesn't make sense. So we could also think about it as God taking a piece off itself. Like, I'm going to take off my finger, and that's my creation. Okay? and then you're separate. Like, I'm now separate from my finger, and then I'm going to take off a toe, and that's a creation. Okay, that's an interesting idea, but why? Why? So I'm going to take off my finger, and that's my creation. I'm going to look at my finger now. But that doesn't make sense to me either. You already knew what it was like to have your finger, but then you're going to put your finger down and just look at it. Okay, it makes more sense to me, okay, too, if you took off your finger and you place it down and you're like, I want to understand what it's like to be that finger now. Just a piece of myself. I'm going to put my consciousness into that finger and exist as just the finger. That makes more sense to me than looking at that finger and just saying, okay, now, finger, go do your thing. I'm going to watch that. Because God, if you think about it, at the beginning, God knew itself. God knew what it was like to have that finger. Why just take that finger off and then watch it do its thing? And it's like God's tearing itself apart. It's like God would be destroying itself. That just doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense if God is placing itself into its creations. Think about that for a minute. That means that God is the source of all. God is placing itself within its creations. And even I've heard, Christians talk about this, that you have a spark of God within you. You have Christ consciousness within you. The Holy Spirit comes upon you. There is no separation, okay? We are all one. So that's my understanding of oneness, and means a lot of things then if we reflect upon that. What that means is that everybody else is God too. Everybody else is God's creation. Everybody else is your consciousness existing as a different experience. Take that in, right? And that means there's no separation. And let's go back to God too, For God to tear off its finger, is it still God, right? If it's tearing apart itself and putting itself around, is it still God? Right? That's an interesting idea too, because if you start taking pieces off of yourself, are you really the entirety of who you were before? So to me, I believe the illusion idea, right? Life is but a dream. And God doesn't change. We're just reflecting that experience of change. So it's like God never lost a finger and it's just pretending and seeing what it's like to be a finger, but it's still attached to God. I hope that makes sense. So it's like God is dreaming, we're a dream. It's all an illusion. And so that would mean too that really there is no separation. You are me. I am you. You might be in California. You might be in China. And so wherever you are, there's really no separation. And this goes to the whole, distance Reiki idea, that you can perform Reiki on somebody miles and miles away. This goes to the quantum physics idea, that whole spooky action at a distance of entanglement. Look it up. Look up entanglement. It's really cool. So, I'm not a scientist. But if you take like a molecule and you change that one molecule, the other molecule will change. Okay, there's been experiments. And so the whole concept of oneness actually goes with quantum physics, which is the new expansion of science that we're understanding here, which leads to the whole idea of law of attraction and manifestation too. If you think about the double slit experiment of quantum physics, in which if you're the observer, you affect the outcome. And then there's other experiments about random numbers and water crystals of Dr. Emoto. And so everything is connected, and so the way that we perceive our environment, things outside ourselves, it's manifesting. We're changing other things because of this oneness, because of this entanglement. We are the ripple in the ocean, but we're also the ocean itself. And that, I think, is so cool, and that's the whole point, I think, of life, is to be the ocean, knowing itself as the ripple.